flagship program in this state, right? And
a bullshit, a bullshit, a bullshit, a bullshit.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another edition of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. My name is Michael Wein, and joining me tonight is my fantastic co-host, Emmy Nixon. Tuesday, July 23rd, 10 p.m. local time here in Houston on what is a rainy week here in the Houston Metroplex. We're back for another edition of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. Tonight, we get into our position-by-position Texas Longhorn roster previews, which should be good. We'll start to familiarize ourselves in depth with this 2024 Longhorns roster, and we'll continue our series of college football team previews for the upcoming season, which, by the way, isn't too far off when it's all said and done. Emmy Nixon, how are you tonight?
I'm doing good, man. I'm excited for this. I think the defensive line group, is one that will be heavily scrutinized heading into the SEC, as is naturally the case with any team heading into the SEC, because it's a spot where you'll be under a lot of stress. You're going against some of the best offensive lines in the country, some of the best running games in the country, some of the best passing games in the country. So this group in particular, after having lost 2 top 40 picks in last year's draft, will be under a lot of pressure and hopefully giving a lot of pressure, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, let's go ahead and jump right into this. I have a graphic for us tonight that will be taken. We'll put it up on the screen, then we'll take it off. We'll put it back up when we need reminders. But here is the 2024 Longhorns defensive tackle depth chart. This is the scholarship board for the defensive tackle. So as you can see, just to lay it out for you before we get into the depths of this conversation, Texas brings back the 2 main frontline guys, most experienced guys that were behind and directly backing up T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy. Those guys are senior Vernon Broughton and senior Alfred Collins, who's coming back for his 5th season of college football. Okay. They brought in 3 transfers, all of which are seniors. Bill Norton from Arizona. They also brought in Tia Savea, who you see at the bottom of your screen, also from Arizona. And they bring in Jermaine Lole, who I don't know if I see on this screen for some weird reason, but they bring in Jermaine Lole, who formerly played for Louisville, committed to Oklahoma in the portal, and then flipped to Texas before he signed any paperwork. And then you have some other younger guys coming back, including Sadir Mitchell, who's a redshirt freshman, was part of that 2023 recruiting class as a 4-star prospect. Jere Bledsoe, who's also a redshirt sophomore, who's been in the program for now 3 seasons. We'll see how much of an impact he can make. And then you have a couple freshmen in Melvin Hills, who was a 3-star, and a higher profile 4-star from Duncanville High School, Alex January, from this past year's recruiting class. So in total, you have a lot of experience, at least on the front lines, through what you brought in through the portal and those 2 returning frontline guys in Vernon Broughton and Alfred Collins. You have 5 seniors. The question is, how good and how impactful can these guys be, both in the run game? As we know, Texas had a top 5 run defense a year ago because of what they had in T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy. And then also, what can they add in pass rush? As it is somewhat cliche, but it is true, the SEC is a line of scrimmage league. So, given all of that, Emmy, when you think of the 2024 Texas defensive line, where does your mind go first? Where do you want to start this conversation?
My mind goes straight to Alfred Collins. He's the senior within this group. one of, I think, a couple seniors actually, but he's the guy that has stayed throughout his time at UT, and I think is set for a breakout. We saw him get the pick six in the spring football game, and obviously it's spring football. It's not anything too crazy, but I mean, out of the guys that we have here, he had by far the best grades per PFF with a 79.9 grade
Yep.
overall, and was 59th out of 883 qualifying defensive tackles in 2023 in overall defensive tackle grade. And that's combining run defense and pass rush. So um, there's another step to go for sure to reach the level that we think he could reach. But if he does reach that, this Texas Longhorns defense will be in a very, very good spot.
So when I think of Alfred Collins, I think of a lot of untapped potential. He's 6'5", 315, 320 with tons of raw athleticism and tools that the NFL is going to slobber over. No matter how productive he is this season, I believe he's going to get drafted in this upcoming 2025 NFL draft. His production on the field will determine how high he can ultimately be drafted, in my opinion. So far, and to be fair, spare playing time behind the guys that we always talk about.
Right.
The two All-American caliber guys that were going to play majority of the snaps last year in T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy. He's been somewhat productive. As you mentioned, his PFF, he graded out well in that department. Some people don't use that as the Bible, but it's a somewhat good metric to kind of tell how a football player is performing. 22 tackles, 2 sacks, 5 quarterback hits. He absolutely showed up using his exceptional combo of, speed, athleticism, his ability to shoot the gaps as a penetrating 3 technique and 5 technique. He absolutely showed some of that, and he's shown glimpses of it throughout his time at Texas. The next step for him is doing what T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy did a year ago. Not becoming an All-American necessarily, because I think that's a little too much and unrealistic to ask going into a conference like the SEC, but doing it on a consistent game-to-game basis where
Snap-to-snap basis, too.
Yeah, a drive-to-drive, half-to-half, game-to-game basis where you feel like he's actually having a tangible impact on the game every single week.
Yep.
Because so far, that hasn't been the case throughout his career. We know, though, through his flashes and just based on looking at him, he looks like what the NFL dreams of at the defensive tackle position. He's got the length, he's got the size, he's got all the tools. Seriously. But it just hasn't come all together yet to morph himself into even like an all Big 12 caliber player. I think if he could become, say, an all SEC 13 defensive tackle, or even an all SEC honorable mention, and just play like a guy that will get drafted into the NFL, maybe not as a first or second rounder, but maybe day 2 or early day 3, just play like an NFL draft pick on a week-to-week basis, and that will significantly help some of the questions that surround this defensive line. One more thing I'll point out on the Alfred Collins front is I think he's best as a disruptive 3 technique. Shooting gaps, using his athleticism, and just being a disruptor. Just let the guy use his skills to disrupt the football game, whether it's in pass rush situations or in run situations. PK, however, and this might be somewhat because of what Texas has had the past couple years on their defensive tackle depth chart with those two guys that we always talk about. But PK has played him more so as kind of like a 5 technique at times.
Right.
I think with what they brought in, the size and experience that they brought in through the portal, I think he'll fit more at that. He'll be the frontline guy in that 3 technique. And then there'll be other guys who rotate in, playing over the center in the 1 technique. That's where I think Alfred Collins is best. He's a former high school basketball standout. So he's got all the athleticism in the world. They just have to find a way to tap into that. And really for Collins, it's a contract year. This is where he's got to show what he is in the best conference in college football, a line of scrimmage league, and it'll ultimately determine not his entire future at the next level, but it will determine where he starts out at the NFL level.
Right. And after the bye week, so week 8 onward, he only cleared 25 snaps in a game twice the remainder of the season. And one of those was the playoff game where he had exactly 25 snaps. And then the other one was the week 13 game, the final game of the regular season, which was, I believe, Texas Tech, I think.
Texas.
Yeah. So I did find that quite interesting. I think part of that could be, obviously, you have Sweat and Murphy. Like, it's late in the year. Let's ride those 2 guys as long as we can. Those are 2 first-round caliber guys. Let's just use the shit out of them. And I get that. But, when he was on the field for those pass rushing snaps, he did a very good job in that setting. And as you mentioned, when he was on the field with those 2 guys, he was often used as a 5 technique. So there's an argument to be made that, like, this version of Alfred Collins might already have broken out in the right situation to, with the right opportunity, I guess. So really, I'm hoping for good health for him, because I really do think the year that we're looking for is coming. I really do believe that.
I do too. I would hope so. The biggest question mark for me on this defensive line is Vernon Broughton. And I don't want to be – I'm going to try to frame this in the best way I can, because I don't want to come off as a negative Nancy. But when I look at Vernon Broughton, who's also a 5th-year senior,
Right.
And did have like his most production as a Longhorn in the time that he was given in 2023, 17 tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss. So he wasn't a nothing backing up Sweat and Murphy. But Texas is going to need a lot more from him. And it's important for him, if he doesn't want to get potentially passed up by a lot of the other guys that Texas either brought in through the portal, if he doesn't want to get his playing time eaten into by, say, Tia Savea or even Jermaine Lole, we will see how that rotation works out, or even a guy like Jere Bledsoe, who's been in the program for a while. He's going to have to play better. And the biggest problem I've seen with Broughton is he doesn't play with great pad level. It's been a constant problem throughout his career, getting washed out in the run game because of his pad level. Sometimes it's good, other times it's just not good at all. And Texas, whether it's the coaching staff, they're going to have to try to fix that because they need a more consistent impact from Broughton. They cannot afford for him to just kind of be he doesn't have to be special, but they can't afford for him to be the same guy that he's been throughout his career, because then you're just relying upon the transfers that you have. And with this expanded playoff and with potentially a longer season for Texas playing more games, you need as many guys that can give you productive snaps as possible. Depth is extremely important, especially nowadays in college football. I think he's learning how to better anchor and create, kind of a car crash, just kind of take up space when teams double team him and try to run his way. And he's going to have to. He needs to progress from just kind of like a, above average player to being somewhat of a problem. I don't want to come off as negative there, but because I do think he has the athleticism to be a good player. But he just sometimes, to me, doesn't necessarily scream. He hasn't always screamed like super bought in and self-aware. So I don't know. He's kind of my biggest question mark from an individual standpoint among the guys that are seniors, for that matter. Not talking about the freshmen or the younger players. Do you have any thoughts on Vernon Broughton at all?
Yeah, I think all of your points I agree with wholly. Like definitely the pad level, that is something that can be coached, but at the same time,
Yeah.
He's going into his 5th year, and it's kind of like shit or get off the pot, and kind of the winner go home part of the year, weeks 11 through all the way through to the playoff game. It seemed like his snap count got cut in half, and that may be for a multitude of different reasons, but I definitely do think that's very telling on where the coaching staff was with him at that time of the season. So I definitely do think he's going to have to, he's going to have to earn the trust of this staff back.
Yeah, I would think so as well. And fall camp for the Longhorns opens a week from tomorrow. They're starting it early this year. And one of the storylines I'll be watching, one of the players I'm watching in fall camp, I'm watching all of the defensive line, but Vernon Broughton in particular is going to be one for those reasons. Let's talk about some of these transfers really fast.
Wait, sorry, say it again. So they're showing fall camp where?
They're starting fall camp.
Oh, right.
Next week.
Gotcha.
He's going to be the guy I want to hear about positively.
Gotcha, yeah.
Vernon Broughton. I'll tell you what, Bill Norton is the guy that I'm most excited about and what he can give Texas right away among the 3 guys they brought in through the portal. In case you don't know a lot about Bill Norton, he comes to Texas from Arizona. And this was a big reason why he comes to Texas from Arizona is because of the Johnny Nansen connection. Johnny Nansen actually helped build a lot of this Texas defensive line transfer class. He had a lot to say. And I think not to drag us off topic, something we'll get into maybe in fall camp, and when we continue to talk about the defense at other positions, especially linebacker. But I think Johnny Nansen, since he kind of technically took a step down from being a defensive coordinator to linebackers coach, is his now position at Texas. I think from what I'm hearing, he's getting a lot more say in this defense than you would think as a linebackers coach. I think he's kind of been made like co-defensive coordinator in some respects, or kind of like a sidekick to PK, with as much say as he's had in personnel decisions and some of the things that we've heard, throughout the spring. I think Johnny Nansen could be as big of a potential factor in how this defense performs in 2024 as potentially anybody on the coaching staff. But given said all that, I think of the 3 portal interior defensive linemen that the Longhorns bring in, Bill Norton, who was a guy who actually started his career at Georgia from the state of Tennessee, was actually a fairly highly recruited prospect and went to Georgia. And we know the monsters they recruit on their defensive line. So that says something, like Georgia thought highly enough of him as a prospect to recruit him. Didn't, of course, get the playing time that he wanted at Georgia because he was behind guys like, I don't know, Jordan Davis, right? I mean, those kinds of guys who are now in the NFL, all those monsters who now play for the Eagles and some other teams, better than anybody. He was behind those guys. And so he goes to Arizona, and, he's an experienced player. I think he's going to be the guy that is going to be kind of the new nose tackle or one technique. You're going to see him a lot over the center. He's never been like a fantastic pass rusher. He's kind of, I don't want to say non-existent in that area, but he's not known for his pass rush ability. What I think you're going to see Bill Norton do, his role in this defense, is going to be to eat blocks on the inside, push the pocket when he can in run and passing situations. He's pretty instinctive knocking down passes. You might see a couple of those, hopefully, throughout the season. But what he's really going to do is he's just going to be an experienced one technique / nose tackle who's going to eat up blocks and use his big frame to just be active and help in the running game, to cause pileups, to eat up double teams. That's going to be his job. And I think if Texas is going to have the kind of run defense that they want going into the SEC, maybe not a top 5 run defense like they had last year, but
right.
with what we think the Texas offense is going to be against a schedule that's, let's be honest, it's not. There are teams on the schedule that are going to try to run the football. One of the biggest tests of which I think is going to come early on in the season when they play Michigan. And then you have teams like Georgia, maybe Kentucky, kind of those hard-nosed teams that will try to run it. I just think of the 3 guys they've brought in, Norton, I think, is going to start right away. I think it's actually going to be Norton and Collins who are the guys who are the definite starters, and then everything else will kind of work around that. I actually think it's going to be Norton, Collins, and then Ethan Burke and Barron Sorrell to start out the season on the defensive line. We'll talk about Ethan Burke and Barron Sorrell. It's kind of, we're grouping them into the edge group in our next episode. But I think Bill Norton is kind of of the 3 guys they brought in, he's the most guarantee on the box-ish in what you're going to get from him. He's just a good football player. And he's going to help just Texas not be – what we don't want from Texas is for them to be for the run defense to be a liability. That's what they can't be. What they need to be is just a solid run defense. Because you would think with the improvements that they've made on the edge and in the secondary, hopefully they'll be able to get more pressure and be a better coverage team. So the run defense, it'll kind of even out. What were you going to say?
Right. A couple things, actually. Just hearing you say that Sorrell and Burke are going to start at edge made me really excited, because thinking about Trey Moore as kind of like a 6-man edge type, that sounds amazing. Secondly, I think Bill Norton's going to be essential to what our run defense is, as you mentioned, but also because of what I think this linebacker core was going to be like. with David Benda and Anthony Hill being able to clear up the mess. I think with guys like Norton just being able to hold their ground is going to be really important, just so that you have those, rushing lanes and, Anthony Hill and David Benda coming in to fill in those spots.
And not to drag us too off topic, not only do you have Trey Moore to bring in, you also have Colin Simmons
Oh,
to
my
bring in.
God. How could I forget about him?
That's exciting from a pass rush standpoint. And that'll be an exciting episode whenever we get to it. I think we're going to try to do it.
Yeah, maybe we'll save that for last or close to last.
I think behind Norton and Collins, I think Vernon brought in, at least from the beginning, and if he earns it, and that'd be great. But I think he's actually competing with their other two transfers for playing time behind Norton and Collins. That's how I kind of view this defensive tackle room. I think the next guy I look at would be Jermaine Lole, who flipped from Texas to Oklahoma in early May. It's kind of that last piece to this defensive tackle transfer haul that they brought in. Texas went heavy at really two positions in the portal. They went heavy at receiver, as we know, and then they went heavy at defensive tackle. I think of these transfers, Jermaine Lole is kind of the guy who will probably he has the most wide range of potential impacts to this team. I think he's got a pretty low floor given his injury history and what he's dealt with the past couple of years, but a very high ceiling if he can reach the heights that he reached at the beginning of his college career. Just listen to this and then we'll kind of move on. It's kind of a star-crossed career that's seen injuries diminish what was actually once kind of a very good, terrific player early on in his career. He began his career at Arizona State. And in just under 2.5 years at Arizona State before he got hurt, racked up 123 tackles, 20 tackles for loss, and 11 sacks. 38 pressures on the quarterback in 2019. And going into the 2021 season, Pro Football Focus had him rated as a top 10 defensive tackle in the entire country. So he started his career. If Texas was getting the 2020 version of Jermaine Lole, we'd be speaking a totally different tune in terms of who's going to start for this football team. But they're not getting that version, unfortunately, of Jermaine Lole. They're getting still a good version of Jermaine Lole, but a guy who hasn't played a ton of football the last couple of years. After it fell apart at Arizona State, he went to Louisville. Played in only 2 games in 2022. Recovered from a season-ending elbow injury. Was able to play an entire season in 2023 for what was a very good Louisville defense. That's what got them pretty much, or helped them get to the ACC title game. Appeared in 12 games. He started in 9 games. And while his play has diminished from 2019-2020 version of Jermaine Lole, he's still a guy who can give you good, experienced football behind Alfred Collins at that 3 technique, I think is where he kind of slots in. This is his 7th season of eligibility given all his injuries. So at a minimum, I think he's a very experienced player who's going to be a part of this rotation. I actually think he's a guy out of all these transfers that might be, when it's all said and done, the most impactful from a pass rush standpoint, given what he's been in his career. But it's just all about, what does this guy really have left in the tank at this point in his college career with all the injuries that he's had? So that's That's Jermaine Lole for me. Do you have any thoughts on Lole or Tia Savea?
Um, well, I think you said it all. To be honest, I mean, I think I'm just excited to see him on the field. To
Yeah.
be perfectly honest, I think all the questions we may have is just going to get answered there. I think that's all I'm really waiting for with him.
Yeah. I think it's the answer probably lies somewhere in between. If he can be just a little bit better than he was last year, backing up Alfred Collins and Bill Norton, that'll be good enough for Texas. And then TSFA is kind of the last piece of this preview, effectively. I kind of just view him as another depth piece who's experienced, who's played with Bill Norton, played in this kind of defense under Johnny Nansen, who's just going to kind of be the slanting, solid run defender type, as that's what he's kind of been in his career. He'll definitely help in run support. He's good moving laterally to make plays. He's just a solid football player, nothing more, nothing less. And so I think at the end of the day, it's Bill Norton at the 1 technique / nose, Alfred Collins as the frontline 3 technique, and then a combination of Savea, Lole, and Vernon Broughton competing in fall camp for the playing time behind those guys. And then you have guys like Jure Bledsoe, Sadir Mitchell, who's an interesting case, Aaron Bryant, and then ultimately the freshmen, who I don't believe are going to make impacts this year. I really like Alex January. I don't think he makes an impact this year. And then Melvin Hills, I think, is a ways away. So as kind of a longer term project. So overall, how confident are you in the defensive line on a scale 1 to 10? Kind of putting you on the spot, but going into, we're kind of going to do a confidence meter for every position group that we talk about. So on a scale 1 to 10, for your expectations of this defensive line, whatever they might be, how confident are you in this group?
I think I feel very confident that this defensive line will do its job within the context of this team, which is support the edge group and hold its own enough on those early downs in the run game to where you can get into those longer third downs and you can let those edge guys really get after things, as well as Alfred Collins, of course, hopefully. So I do feel very confident. I'm going to say I'm at about an 8.
Okay. I'm a little less than that, but I think I'm around a 6.5 out of 10. I think they're going to be very solid. I think they're going to be, the hope is that they're not a liability at any stretch of the imagination, which I don't think they will be, just because of how much experience they now have and the depth that they have, the capable bodies that they have. But for me to be an 8 or a 9, I need to know that one of these guys, maybe even 2 of these guys, step up and become like NFL draft pick kinds of guys in the SEC. I'm hoping Alfred Collins is that. The question is, who else can become some version of that? So I'm about a 6.5, a little lower than you, but I still do agree with you in that I do think the defensive line will do its job within the context of this defense, hopefully. The main goal is just in games like Michigan, Georgia, Kentucky, the teams that are going to try to muck it up, don't let them run all over you. Don't be the liability. Don't be the reason Texas loses more games than it should in 2024. That's the interior defensive line for right now. That's as big as we're going to get. on that side of things for a preview. I thought that was pretty in depth. So if you want to know about the Texas defensive line, this is all you really need. Anything else before we move on for you?
Man, I just really hope that Alfred Collins steps up to the plate, man. That's really all there is to it with the defensive line. I think at the end of the day, the transfer guys will fill into their roles well, barring health, of course.
Yeah.
There was a reason that they were all brought in, and I trust that the staff made the right decisions by bringing them in. But to me, it's Alfred Collins being the guy, the X factor of this group.
Yeah, another thing that gives me probably more confidence than I should have, just for some reason, I kind of feel like Johnny Nansen is somewhat of a security blanket. Just what he's, I think, going to bring to this defense and what he made Arizona's defense into last year. That was a very good football team that clearly was effective in disrupting Oklahoma's offense in that bowl game and winning a lot of games last year. So I think that's a bigger loss for Arizona. And one of the reasons with a returning quarterback and a returning potential top wide receiver in next year's draft. Not the only reason, but one of the reasons, aside from losing, their head coach who went to Washington, that Arizona's not in that group of favorites in the Big 12 going into this year. Losing Johnny Nansen, I think, as that defensive coordinator was kind of a big loss for them. And then losing their two frontline guys in Savea and Norton, who followed Nansen to Texas. That's not insignificant for Arizona, but that's not what we're here to talk about tonight. I want to get into at least two of these teams. I don't know that we'll get into all three, but we might. Who knows at this point? I actually wanted to start with Notre Dame, but I don't know if you were okay with that or if you wanted to actually start in the Big Ten with Penn State or Michigan. It's up to you.
No. Let's start with Notre Dame.
Okay.
Feel comfortable with that.
Let's take that down. Don't know why that reappeared on the screen. Notre Dame. The reason I think Notre Dame is interesting is because they don't really play in a conference. They play 5 ACC games every year, but they're not really considered in the ACC officially. They are a solid program. They are, I think, going into this year, a top 10-ish team. I really do think that. Of course, everyone remembers Marcus Freeman's first season as head coach, starting out pretty rough, 0-2 to start, losses in the non-conference to Marshall and a 3-9 Stanford team, which weren't good. Last year, I think they took the step that they really needed to take, not just going from 9 to 10 wins, but they improved in virtually every single facet of football. They were a very good team last year. And really the only games they lost were because of, well, actually I'll save that for in a little bit, but were because of bad quarterback play, which we'll get into here in a minute. But I do think this team can be and is a playoff contender going into this year. Do you have any general sentiment on Notre Dame before we get into like offense, defense really fast?
Well, I think no, I'll save it for our conversation about the team.
Okay. I think the biggest thing here, well, there are two big things. Offensively, Their offensive coordinator from last year, Gerard Parker, took a head coaching job at Troy. Therefore, Freeman was allowed to go out and pay big money, top dollar, for a top-notch offensive coordinator in Mike Denbrock, who was the coordinator at LSU last year, who had the number one offense in America. I think that's significant. Not saying Notre Dame is going to have that kind of offense this year. I don't think they have the quarterback nor the weapons, the level of what LSU had, but it's significant. I think you're going to see quite a philosophical shift in the kind of offense that they run. Last year, it was a lot of Audric Estime, power run game, play action. You saw a lot of tight end heavy, bunch formations, crammed boxes. This year, I think you're going to see with Riley Leonard, who's hopefully healthy, which I'll get into in a minute, them spread the field more vertically and horizontally. They're going to operate more out of shotgun. I think you're going to see more 11 personnel, one back, one tight end. Then you saw, maybe 12 personnel, one back, two tight ends last year. I would look for more run pass option, which has been a big feature of Mike Denbrock offenses, with an athletic quarterback when he's healthy, and Riley Leonard, who transfers in from Duke. The problem for Riley Leonard last year was his ankle was not healthy. I think Notre Dame is hoping that they can make it kind of 2 years in a row in this approach that they've taken at the quarterback position through the portal with ACC transfer quarterbacks. Last year, they bring in Sam Hartman from Wake Forest, and he graduates. And fun fact about Sam Hartman, he actually ends his career third all time in passing touchdowns in NCAA college football. I just learned that today. That's somewhat surprising to me, but he was good. He had a couple clunkers, though, last year. In some of Notre Dame's bigger games, he did not play well, and that led to losses against Clemson and Louisville. Riley Leonard was one of the higher-rated quarterbacks in the transfer portal. I don't know where you would rank him. That's a totally different discussion for another day. But he was knocked out against, funny enough, Notre Dame back in October of last year with an ankle injury that really held him back the rest of the year. But the thing people hold on to with Riley Leonard was the year before last year, where he was a 64% completion percentage guy, threw for almost 3,000 yards, 20 touchdowns, and 6 picks. And to add on to that, was very mobile and athletic, almost 700 yards rushing and 13 scores on the ground as a rusher.
Oh, wow. 13.
I
I
think
didn't know it was that much.
if his ankle rehab has really gone well and he's fully healthy, assuming he's back to full speed, I think he can be maybe not, no one's Jaden Daniels, but he can be a really effective RPO kind of really good quarterback in this Notre Dame offense. With some of the other questions they have on offense, like, for example, replacing an All-American left tackle in Joe Alt, which isn't going to be easy. Riley Leonard could be an X factor with just his ability to make something out of nothing at the quarterback position. I think those are the two X factors for Notre Dame offensively. They always have had, for the most part, really good tight end play, and I don't worry about that. They recruit that position almost better than anyone else in the country. They lose a 1,300-yard rusher in Audric Estime, who broke the school record for touchdowns last year with 18. But they have a duo that I'm really excited about in Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love, who are going to kind of be a two-headed monster at the running back position. And they signed 2 4-stars in the 2024 class, 2 guys that could contribute early on at that position. And then they have guys who showed flashes last year. Jaden Greathouse and Jaden Thomas, younger kind of talents at the wide receiver position that will be asked to step up, but I do believe in. I actually think this offense, with hopefully a kind of a philosophical shift a little bit in the kind of offense that they run, an athletic quarterback, which Sam Hartman really wasn't, in my opinion, I think they can get a lot out of this offense. And if they do, that really takes them to another level in terms of what they can accomplish in 2024.
Yeah,
Do you have any thoughts on
honestly,
all
I
that?
can't remember the last time Notre Dame had a rushing threat at quarterback. Sorry, what were you going to say? What were we going to finish there?
No, I was done. I just want to get your thoughts on all of that.
Yeah, I think people are definitely not taking into account how much of an upgrade Riley Leonard is. I really do believe that. And also the amount of receivers that they brought in as well, which I'm sure we're going to get to here in a little bit. But the kid from FIU is going to be a
Yep.
fantastic deep threat for them.
Yep.
They brought in a kid from
Yep.
Clemson as well,
Yep.
just off the top of my head. I can't remember his name.
Yep.
And now, obviously, they're replacing two guys at tackle
Yep.
who both went into the draft this year. One being Joe Alt, who was a top 5 selection. But this is basically offensive line university. Notre Dame is. Like, I think if we're going to trust any school to be able to, build up their talent through their system, it's Notre Dame. And I do like that they're taking the effort or making the effort to modernize their offense. I really think that's necessary in today's college football. The idea of just we're going to win with defense and run the shit out of the football and call play action 13 times a game. That is great and all, but then you play a team like, I don't know,
Ohio State.
Ohio State, for example, right?
Yep.
Who matches you on talent, and the game will be won on the margins, right?
Right. Like it was last year in that really
Exactly.
close game that came down to the wire. Exactly.
And at the end of the day, the team with the better passing game won the day. And obviously that was on the final drive of the game and all that. But your defense wasn't able to win you that game. And that's how college football is sometimes. Your defense sometimes isn't going to be able to win you the game. Your offense is going to have to pull up its end of the bargain. It's going to be really hard to win games against really great teams consistently if you're not putting up 20, 25 plus points. So I really do like that they're making this change. And I really do think it's going to be really, really good for them in the long run. This is a program that I think is in a really, really good spot to benefit from all of the change and shuffling that's happening in college football right now.
Yeah. A couple more notes on the offense, and then we'll talk about the defense and the outlook for Notre Dame.
Right.
We talked about Chris Mitchell, who comes in from Florida International. It's kind of like a deep threat. He's going to be an instant starter for Notre Dame at the receiver position. I talked about the sophomores who need to step up to the plate a little bit, and Jaden Greathouse and Jaden Thomas, who I think will play a significant role in this receiver room. But they did bring in and they did take the initiative to go in the portal and get in a 1,000-yard receiver from Florida International last year in Chris Mitchell. And then another experienced former highly touted recruit himself in Bo Collins from Clemson, who is a former 5-star. Has room to improve, but hopefully with some better quarterback play, high-level quarterback play, and more pieces around him, as he was kind of one of the focuses at Clemson, who will thrive. And then the next guy in the line of great tight ends in Notre Dame that we've seen, Mitchell Evans, I think projects. Think about guys like Colston Loveland at Michigan, who's kind of that next guy maybe the next number one tight end next year's draft from early mocks that I've seen. Maybe not, nobody really is Brock Bowers from Georgia, but he's going to be a stud at Michigan. They're going to rely upon him a lot. I think Mitchell Evans is trending up. I really do like the skeleton from offensive coordinator to the quarterback to the pieces that they have and brought in on this offense. And I trust with their history of development on the offensive line, I trust they'll be good enough there. The key is just keeping Riley Leonard healthy, hoping that he's back to 100% and can play and is available. If he is, I like Notre Dame offensively. Last year, Notre Dame was very good on defense. They were 8th in scoring defense, 16 points per game. They were 5th in total defense, allowing 276 yards per game. They were 5th in yards per play allowed. And they were 30th, so top 30 in third down defense. They were good in pretty much all areas. They were 3rd in pass defense. They were 1st in opposing quarterback rating. And they returned over half of their production from last year's defense. They returned 55% of their production from a year ago on the defensive side of the ball. They did lose some impactful pieces, though. You think about J.D. Bertrand, who provided a lot of productivity and leadership in that linebacker room. Someone's going to need to step up and help replace him. Marist Leofau, I think I'm saying that right, also left. They have some holes at linebacker. Jack Kaiser does return. He's been a solid guy for them. They have an open spot at linebacker. How do they fill that is one of the big questions defensively. They return some high-level dudes on defense, though. Howard Cross, who I think was an All-American at defensive tackle, he's coming back. And then Xavier Watts, who led the nation last year with 7 interceptions and returns, the returns that he got on those interceptions put the Notre Dame offense in prime position to score most of the time. He's coming back in the secondary. I think this defense is still going to be very good. And I think with an improved offense, they're just going to be – I think they're going to have one of the better, more dominant fronts in college football. You have guys like Riley Mills, Jordan Botello. They brought in R.J. Oben from Duke, who was a very good edge guy through the portal, who should help in pass rush situations. I think with their defensive front, with a couple playmakers back in the secondary, there will be a couple holes they have to fill here and there. But looking at their schedule, who's the best quarterback they face? I mean, is it Connor Weigman on the road in week 1? Is it maybe DJU November 9th against Florida State? I mean, those are the two most proven guys, probably. Yeah. I think Notre Dame defense is going to fare just fine, even though they are replacing some NFL talent. Do you have any opinions on that?
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think defensively, I think the guys in the building know how they want to do things, like the structure of things. And I think the good thing for them is they've had a great defense for years. And once you have the ball rolling and how you want your culture established, I think maintaining that becomes a little bit more manageable as guys, come in and out each year. I think the culture that's already been established under Freeman is still going to pay its dividends and continue that great defensive play.
Yeah. So an overall outlook. I think this is the year where Marcus Freeman and this program are ready for the national spotlight, being on a national stage in the college football playoff. Marcus Freeman has done a really good job elevating their talent profile and their recruiting profile, both through the high school ranks and in the portal. It's not the easiest to recruit at Notre Dame because of the high academic standards that they have at the school, but he's done the best job that he can. And I think their schedule is really, really favorable. I could see them even running the table against this schedule if things fall right. Now, that being said, you are playing a road game in the SEC where game day is going to be week number 1 against an A&M team that, just in terms of raw talent, in terms of the high number of super blue chip profile recruits on that team, kind of equals or betters you. But that should be a fantastic game week 1. There's a reason game day is going. But aside from that game, I really don't see where they would slip up. I mean, they're playing Florida State, but that's a home game. And they're coming off a bye. They should have plenty of time to get primed up for that. And you're playing USC, but as we talked about, I think it was in our last episode, what are we really – that's a game you should win. If you are a prime playoff contender, that's a game you should win. I think 12-0, 11-1, maybe they slip up once and they're a lock for the playoff. Where it gets interesting because they are still an independent, and with the auto bid system now, if they go 10-2 with their schedule, which I don't deem as super rigorous, how is the committee going to view that? If there are, say, three 10-2 SEC teams that are also vying for those same playoff spots, how do you compare that? I don't know. I ultimately don't know what the committee will do. I think for Notre Dame to be a safe lock, they need 12-0 or 11-1, which I absolutely think is doable given their schedule. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think the expectation is the playoff this year. I need to ask you one thing though. I want to clarify one thing.
Yeah.
So since they're not considered group of 5, I'm assuming is the highest they can be in the playoff 6, technically.
So they're not. Well, now it's group of 4, but I know what you mean.
Group of 4.
The 4, the way I understand it, the 4 conference champions get the top 4 seeds. They're auto bids. They're the top 4 seeds. How they will be seeded, I don't know. But they are guaranteed top 4 seeds in a first round bye. After that, it's really kind of a who's who.
Gotcha.
I think the highest they can be, the highest Notre Dame could be, technically, is 5th, if I'm not mistaken. So, and technically, when you think about it, this is something we haven't really talked about, but being the 5th seed in this version of the college football playoff might not be the worst thing in the world. Because you still get a home game, at least in the first round, and you'll be hosting supposedly the weakest team, the 12 seed, the 5 versus 12 matchup in that first game. And a lot of people are assuming that's going to be the group of 5 team that gets in. I don't know. It may not be the worst thing in the world to be the number 5 seed when it's all said and done.
Yeah.
But it's something we just don't know because we haven't seen this yet. We haven't seen college football playoff games, get this, actually being played on college football campuses. Man, how did that
go figure, right?
Go figure. Okay. Well, here are our options here. Okay. kind of figuring stuff out live on the air. As we are a little bit rusty, we haven't done an episode in, I don't know, almost a week. Number one, we can jump into Michigan, and then our next episode, finish out the Big Ten. That would be Penn State, Oregon, and Ohio State. Okay? Or we can stop for right now and, I don't know, figure out the rest off air. Which do you prefer?
I gotta be honest with you, man. I got a text from one of my family members. I'd actually prefer if we stop, because I gotta address a few things
Okay.
with them. But yeah, I think for our next episode, it'll definitely be either the first two Big Ten teams or the first three Big Ten teams. Either one.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll stop right there. Hopefully, before I go out of town on Saturday, at the minimum, we'll have an NFL episode for you guys, our weekly NFL episode, and then I'm hoping another dit hole, and maybe one of the days, tomorrow or Thursday, we can double up,
Right.
and maybe add in a gut check / Olympics episode as the Olympics start on Saturday. I know the opening.
They came up quickly. Wow. Okay. Yeah.
I know the opening ceremony, I think, is on Friday, but the games start Saturday, I think is what it is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It'd be fun to talk a little bit about the Olympics. Maybe.
Yeah, and I think for doubling up, a Thursday would work better for me.
Okay, so I think tomorrow will be our NFL episode, and we're going to be doing 3 teams, by the way, I think, in that episode.
Finishing up our first tier.
Yeah.
Or I guess 4th tier, depending on how you think about it.
And then hopefully Thursday we'll be able to double up with more college football content and a gut check or Olympics episode that we'll figure out. But until then, like and subscribe. If you like our channel, you like what we're doing with these college football team deep dives and our deep dive into the Texas Longhorns and all sports, like and subscribe. Share it with any Longhorn friends that you might have, or just college football lovers that you know. And then we'll be putting out more content, even potentially on my vacation next week. We'll try to get an episode or 2 in. So with all that being said, have a fantastic night. My name is Michael Wein. That's Emmy Nixon. And we'll see you next time on Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports.